Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkl SEND. As a former teacher in SENDCO myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I'm really excited to be joined by Lisa Henshall. I'm going to class her as my friend as well. Is that fair enough, Lisa?
Yeah.
Lisa is an experienced, passionate and highly respected educational leader with 22 years in education, including 18 years serving as a teacher, SENDCO senior leader, designated safeguarding lead, looked after children teacher and PSHE pastoral lead. And throughout her career, Lisa has championed inclusive, relationship-driven education, putting the needs, voices and well-being of children at the heart of everything she does. And as SEN strategic lead at St Bartholomew's CE Multi-Academy Trust, she has played a pivotal role in driving systemic improvement for pupils with SEND, while also supporting staff development, whole school leadership and trust strategy development. She's brilliant, as you can tell. Lovely to have you here, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I don't know how to carry on after that introduction.
Just bask in it. Just absolutely bask in the introduction. So we've heard a little bit about yourself, but I always want to know, where does this passion come from? Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and where your passion for supporting children and young people with SEND comes from?
Yes, I think I worked in recruitment for 10 years, straight from school. And a lot of that time was about finding jobs for people that struggled. So we worked with a lot of adults that maybe struggle with reading or writing or lots of different reasons. And I think doing that made me think about where did they start? So what happened for them that they got to that point where, they were struggling to work. And then after 10 years, I decided I wanted to go a step back and retrain as a teacher, and went to university and did that. And in the final year, the fourth year, you had the choice to specialise. And I was at the Crewe campus of MMU, and special educational needs was one of the specialisms, but it was in Didsbury. And I'd only just learned how to drive and I was too scared to travel. So I chose computing instead, which was so boring and really not my thing. But that's what I chose. So I left with a specialism in computing, and literally over a year, they taught us to turn it off and turn it on again, and most things will work. So that was great. I'd got that advice at the end of a year of study. But then started teaching and very quickly realised that there are children that stay with you as a teacher. And I know you know that. And you struggle to sleep at night because you're worrying about them. And there was a particular boy in year 3 in my first couple of years, and he was from a farming family. And at year 3, he still couldn't read or write. And I spent hours and hours and hours trying to come up with different strategies as a class teacher, spoke to the SENDCO, and everything that we tried really just didn't move him on. And then this one day we had a light bulb moment where it was class news in the days when we had time to share class news. And he shared that he had a new tractor for his birthday. So it was year 3, but it had a real tractor for his birthday. And he told the whole class what tractor it was, how fast it could go. Literally, we all knew everything about that tractor by the time he'd finished. And it just started a little thought off for me around reframing all of the learning we were doing around tractors. So we did a class project around tractors, and he led that because he was the expert in the room. And by the end, and that was maybe halfway through the autumn term, and by the end of that year, because we built it around his love of tractors and because we brought his family in around their farming community, he made fabulous progress. And we didn't close the gap by the end of the year, but he made fabulous progress in his understanding of what his strengths were. And if he wanted to be a farmer, and you need to know how to read and you need to know how to write, but actually he held that knowledge and he was the expert in the room, and that his self-confidence meant that he was more able to feel challenge and accept challenge. It's hard to sit with challenge, isn't it? It really did transform. And a number of years ago on Facebook, he popped up at a graduation ceremony from university, something to do with farming and agriculture, and this big handsome man. And I saw that photo and my heart just doubled in.
Oh,
I thought I didn't sleep over him when I was a
yeah.
teacher. And he not only had he achieved, but he had absolutely, succeeded and graduated, and he looked so happy. And I just thought that literally is a difference we make if we get it right.
Yeah.
And I think that just sparked that. I wonder why. I wonder if. What more can we do? And I think that just becomes that your internal voice, doesn't it? That way of
Yeah,
working.
sort of compass and what you do. You've given me shivers. That's such a lovely story of what you've done and how you've supported him and how you made him the expert and the benefits for his self-esteem when you've done that as well, because that is a huge problem, especially when they get to like year three. If they're at that stage, everything's so literacy based, isn't it? And just
Absolutely.
the impact you must have had on him. That's so lovely, Lisa.
Those children stay in your heart, don't they? And I've got lots and lots that we could talk about, but I think it's just that peeling back the layers of what can the child do. So
Yeah,
starting with what can the child do, and how can we build on that. And another example was a child that we had in year 5. I had her in year 5, and she had missing corpus callosum, so the middle part of her brain hadn't developed. And parents have been told that, potentially she might not survive, that she might be blind, she might not be able to hear. So a whole range of trauma in her early life. And then by the time we got to year 5, she still couldn't read very well. And all she wanted to do was be a mum. She still played with dolls. She wanted to have her own babies when she was old enough. And so in year 5, we flipped what we were doing because we tried every intervention. We'd got rigor, we got consistency. Her self-esteem had flourished and her confidence, but those reading and writing skills and maths just, just she just couldn't retain that knowledge. But we did a project with her around what it is to be a mum and scenarios around what if your baby needs medicine from the doctors? How would you get the prescription? How would you read how much they need? And again, for her, that click in purpose and motivation for that learning meant that by the end of year 6, she went on to mainstream school, still with an EHCP and a whole range of bespoke support. But she was learning to read, and then she started learning to read on text messages. And then we brought in examples of medicine bottles because we did a project around Braille for a visually impaired child as well. But she was reading the medicines, and it was finding that hook, as we know,
yeah.
that made it purposeful for her, which then made me disappointed that I hadn't thought of that sort of 2 or 3 years before. Maybe she wouldn't have been ready for that
No,
at that point,
exactly.
but she was so ready. And the last that I heard was that she was doing really well at high school. So it's that
Oh.
child-centered approach, isn't it? Find what they're good at, find what they're interested in, and build outwards from that rather than deciding where they should be and what they need to know and just trying to make that happen. Because we're human beings, not computers. It doesn't work, does it?
Oh, and you're so caring and so lovely, Lisa, because I love that that question was about me asking you about yourself, and you've just talked about children that you've cared about and you've looked after, which is brilliant. And I think that's fabulous about you, and it really shows your passion, even more so than somebody who goes on about what they've done themselves. You're talking about the children, which is the most important thing. So thank you for that. So one of the things we wanted to talk about with you was all about resource provisions, because we know the government's sort of looking at prioritising this, or already doing a little bit of this already, aren't they, and trying to focus on making mainstream schools more inclusive. And one of the ways they're doing this is by suggesting schools and trusts do this with resource provisions. And you know a lot about that, which we'll talk about in a minute. But could you explain to us what a resource provision is, or I know there's different variants of what it can look like.
Yeah, so I looked up the DFE definition just to be really sure.
Excellent.
We've been doing a lot of work as a trust around this. So the DFE definition is a specialised support within the mainstream school for pupils with SEND, taught mainly in the mainstream class with over 50% expectation that they're in class, but with a separate provision area for specific interventions or specific support that's needed.
Yeah.
So across our trust, we've got some resource provisions. We've also got some SEND units.
Yeah.
So the DFE definition for that is a special provision where children are taught mainly in separate classes, but with the
Right.
spending up to 50% in their mainstream class. So we wanted to be really clear around DFE definition, but also what do the children we have in front of us need, and how can we develop what we've got to be able to ensure they have a sense of belonging, they're absolutely included in the school family, and they get the chance to succeed and thrive in an environment that's suitable for them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got our enhanced provisions, and there wasn't a DFE definition for that, but we know
Oh.
that's our that's our provision within school. That's
Yeah.
in that we create in response to the needs of a particular cohort of children that we've got,
Yes.
where we can ensure that they have the opportunity to thrive as well.
Yeah.
I think it's so important, isn't it? We hear, I heard Gary Obin speak last week, and he's a wonderful human being, isn't he? And he talked about how all we hear at the moment is we're in the middle of a SEN crisis, and talking about the fact that the phrase SEN crisis isn't very helpful because it gives you that sense of emergency and doom and gloom. He said, but he recognised that we are actually in the middle of a SEN crisis. But
Yeah.
what can we do about it? And he talked about controlling the controllables and being really clear on, what do we have any ownership over, and what can we impact? And out of about 20 different things that were on the board, and he made us all stand along a continuum in typical, a secondary drama teacher style. We all realised that so much of the difficulties that were on the board, we had impact over, and we were
Yeah.
able to change. And I think there was one that we sort of agreed there wasn't a lot we could do around it. I think it was to do with the Ofsted framework, but we could choose how we responded to that. So
Yeah.
it is empowering, isn't it? So I think for us, we know we've got children coming through into mainstream that have more complex needs than we've ever seen.
Yeah.
We know that for lots of reasons. And we also have less space available in our specialist schools than ever. And we can't just sit around saying that we're in the middle of a SEN crisis. Oh no, there's nothing we can do. We've got to be innovative, and
Yeah.
we haven't got time to wait for white papers to happen. We've got to make sure that we're really strategically looking at the children in front of us at a
Yeah.
trust level. What do they need? And how can we make that happen? And that's what we're doing.
Brilliant. And I think it's so true. And I think when we talk about the SEND crisis as well, it almost becomes like a separate thing. And I posted something on LinkedIn the other day. We're not, it's almost like it becomes like its own object. Like we're
Yeah.
not talking about children, we're talking about the SEND crisis. It's like it's a thing. And
Yeah,
we're forgetting that it's about kids. And it's like you say, that they can't wait for us to mess about with policy and sort all these things out. They actually just need people to be doing it day in, day out, like you're doing right now.
absolutely. And so much of what we do, we talk about this, there's no money, there's no spaces, there's no this, there's no that. But what we do have is absolutely committed individuals working in our schools and our trusts. And I'm sure there'll be the same working at the DFE and working in the local authorities, where everybody's committed to improving outcomes for our children. And some of the main things that we can do, and I've been working this week with the Staffordshire Virtual School. They've got an amazing project that they're doing for Staffordshire schools around restorative relational practices. And it doesn't cost any money to ensure that you've got a relational restorative practice that underpins everything you do in school. If everybody in school, from your caretaker to your office staff, to your middays and cleaners and teachers, everybody, if they're trauma informed, and we understand behaviour is communication, and we understand that children need to feel psychologically safe, and that behaviour is a form of communication, often of unmet need or crisis, then that doesn't cost any money. It's culture.
Yeah.
And if we get that right, and that's the bedrock of everything that we do, our children, our families, and our staff feel psychologically safe. And we know that Maslow's hierarchy of needs all those years ago at university, 25 years ago, it still stands. We need to feel safe, we need to feel connected, and we need to feel that we belong.
Yeah.
And I was reading an article this morning on the CST about inclusion is an emotion. We talk about inclusion, don't we, as a verb. It's something that we're doing, but actually feeling included is an emotion. And that's our intention. We want our children to feel included, and that can only come through culture, which doesn't cost any money. There are things that do cost money, but actually that doesn't. And I think we
That
need to
mindset
that.
loss doesn't. You're
Absolutely.
right. I love that. That's really, really important. One thing as well, when we're talking about inclusion, then, so resource provisions, I think, and I've seen a lot of discussions around this, it's how we make sure resource provisions, which by their very nature are taking children out of a class, how that is inclusive. And I appreciate it's a real difficult balance. So how do we do this? What's the answer, Lisa? How do we make resource provision, make sure they're inclusive and they enable the sort of true inclusion with learners who access it with their peers, etc. So they're not just, it's not a separate thing when it is a separate thing.
Yeah, that's a huge question, Georgina. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. If you could solve that for me, Lisa, that would be great.
Well, I think for us, it's that belonging that underpins everything. So for our children that are in resource provisions within our schools, they are children that prior to that would have been unable to be in class. So there are children that are so overstimulated by being in the classroom that they just can't be, and
Yeah.
they're walking, running out of school, disengaged and shut down, or in class, but not in class in their mind and spirit. They're just shut down and terrified, but you can't see that. So for us, we make sure that our resource provisions are at the heart of our school, and that our staff are part of the whole staff family. So everybody gets the same training. So the enhanced training that our resource provision staff will be accessing, everybody gets. One of our schools that I was in the other day, every member of the SLT has done the autism training up to level 2 so far, because if our SLT are leading with autism inclusive approaches, then it's from the top down, isn't it? So making sure that everybody is upskilled. And that sense of belonging. So again, it's on a child by child basis. So we've got resource provision SEND units and internal provisions across our trust in various presentations that have developed around the need of the children that are within them. And I think, and that's why they look so different. So for some of them, children will spend time, they will start the day in their classroom with their class and have their registration and their input, and then they'll go to be able to complete their maths and English learning within a low sensory environment with maybe 5 or 6 children. So they're not in a corridor, they're not off to do an intervention. They go to their hub, their safe space for their maths and English, because it's delivered in a way that really meets their needs. Whereas for some other children, it might be that they don't need that morning support, but actually it's in the afternoon where it's a bit less structured that they struggle, and then they're able to access that in there. I think we've moved away from tick box interventions where you take a couple of children out, at 9:30 in the middle of an English lesson to go and do an intervention that may or may not be making a difference. We've really recognised that and research underpins that the whole school approach to SEND and inclusion works. So we ensure that every child in our school has access to every additional adaptation that may be in place. So, for example, we had 6 Ofsteds in 6 weeks. We had a lovely streak a little while back.
Oh, wow.
And one of the inspectors that I walked around, we walked into a year 3 class, and he said that we were the 3rd St. Bart's school that he'd attended, and he always loved attending our schools, which from an Ofsted inspector, because our inclusion is always so, he can sense that and see that as he walked around. But the classroom we walked into, the teacher had delivered their teaching, and it's recorded. So every child has an iPad. We're one-to-one iPad schools and Apple distinguished. So in front of every child in that classroom was an iPad, and on that iPad was the 5-minute video of the input that the teacher had just made, not for the children with the HCPs or the children with SEND. Every child had that, and on every iPad was the keynote that was on the board in front of them, so they had it and they had control over that. So if they needed to flick back to the previous to sort of reprocess what was just said, they could do. Wow. They had they could split the screen, and the children were such experts. They were showing me how they did that beyond my ability, splitting their screen and getting up their scaffolds with sentence terms and spellings. They were just showing me how to do that, and I've asked them to make leaflets for me so I can do that. But that was for every child, and coloured overlays if they want it for any child. So everything that was available for a child with SEND was available for every child. And the inspector and I were talking about how, how we are able to learn every day, even as adults, changes based on the evening before, the morning that we've had, the journey to school,
the lack of coffee.
There could be children, yes, of course. And too much Diet Coke.
Too much Diet Coke, lack of coffee. For our listeners, by the way, I've run out of coffee at home. That's what that's all about.
So I think that having that ability to, we could have had a child that came into school that day that where there'd been a domestic abuse incident the night before, and the child might have had police involvement and not had any breakfast. We don't know the lived experience of all of our children. Yeah. That day, she might not have had any special educational needs whatsoever, but she absolutely couldn't think straight. And everything that she needed to succeed was there. She didn't have to ask, she didn't have to talk about it, because that provision is available for every child. And for me, that's the key. So whether a child's accessing that in their classroom, or they're taking that into a smaller environment so that they have that, low arousal, calm, quiet space to work in, because that's what they need, but still have the same education, the same access to the learning, and it's still led by the teacher, which is fantastic.
I love that so much. And I think it's so important as well that we're giving children because these children become adults, and these tools we need as adults to be successful in society, etc., don't we? Things like having these adjustments and realizing you can have different things to help support you in different times of your life, etc. I think is really important for everybody.
And I was laughing a few weeks ago because we talked about talking tins,
Yeah.
and I remember being in a classroom where the eaves were open because it used to be open plan, and I had a child using a talking tin, and the teacher from next door came in and said, "Do you mind? We can't think because of your talking tin." And so you think for that child, so many children don't like to hear their own voice back, and children don't like to look different, and they don't like to feel different. And again, in the classrooms at St. Bart's, it isn't your children with SEND who have an iPad or a laptop or going out for intervention. Children are in class, and everything that they need they can access independently,
Yeah.
but also ask for support if they need it. But everybody looks the same. And so if you're using speech to text, anybody in the room could be. If you're year six accessing year two resources, nobody can see that because everybody's got an iPad. So all of those barriers that I think, if I go back 5 years, 10 years, as SENCO trying to ensure that everyone feels included and you haven't got any sense of being different impacting your self-esteem. I know not every school is lucky enough to have a
Yeah.
one-to-one iPad, but I really see that across the trust that our children with SEND are the experts because they're the ones that are accessing all of those resources. And recently one of our schools were creating a description, so a setting description. And if I think back to when I was teaching, you'd put a picture on the board and everyone would write something, and often, it might have been a bit boring or you'd have some disengagement. But in the classroom, the children were typing a setting description for their story from their imagination, and then AI was used to create the picture, and then the pictures were printed and shared around the class. And then children talked about what words they could change because one wanted it to be gloomier, another one wanted bigger trees that looked a bit more threatening. So they just changed the typing of the words. And if they weren't typing, they were using speech to text. So it was a level playing field for every child. They were creating these images they were magical. It made me want to be back in the classroom so I could do that with
It's
classes of
making
children.
me want to do it. It sounds fun.
How amazing. But again, it's reducing those barriers to learning for all the children. And that's what I know. I've gone off on a tangent because the
Yeah, you
question
haven't.
is
It's
about
good.
resource provisions and SEND units, but that happens in whichever part of the building
Yeah.
you're in.
I
And
think that's
it's
brilliant.
completely open and transparent for children that, some children might be working in different areas and be back in class, or vice versa. It might just be when they need it because we all need different things at different times, don't we?
Yeah. I think that's so important. I remember talking to somebody about standing desks and a similar sort of thing, and then being like, that teachers were a little, or some teachers were a little bit like worried about having standing desks in the classroom because it made some children look different. And they were like, no, 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 we have them so that anyone can use them. And then there were teachers being concerned about the fact that then if they were available for anybody to use, that people would like kids would abuse it. They'd go and use it when they didn't need to, etc. But it's amazing how kids don't. And I think we don't give them high enough credit on this. Actually, they do get to use these things in the correct way. And same with like a sensory room. I remember talking to somebody about a sensory room, and they were saying they have access, children can use it at any time they need. And at first, when they introduced that, people were like, you can't possibly say that, they'll just walk out the classroom. And yes, the first couple of weeks they might have done, but they soon settled down and they soon used it when they needed it. And it's teaching them that autonomy and those decisions themselves to make when they need it is so important, rather than how can we determine when they need these resources at the end of the
Exactly.
day? And we shouldn't be.
No, and children know what they need, and all children want to succeed.
Yeah.
We often talk about if children could do well, they will.
Yeah.
They don't want to be in trouble. They don't want to be told off for being out of their seat or for walking around the school. Or so if we give a range of resources, a range of tools that they can access when they need. There's a classroom at Belgrave, one of our schools, and it's the most amazing environment I've ever been into from a learning point of view. And I've got some photographs which I'll send across to you. So there's one of the walls is a kneeling station. So it's there are little knee pads all the way along. So if children want to kneel and work, they can. The other wall is a standing wall, so they can stand and work if they want. There's a circular table in the middle. There are bean bags across the other side of the wall. So every way you could imagine you might feel comfortable working, because I enjoy lying on the floor on my front just watching TV sometimes. It just
Yeah.
feels nice. And for some of our children, they just want to lie down and do their writing. So who's to say that they've got to sit on a often uncomfortable school chair?
And they are uncomfortable. Yeah.
When you sit in a staff meeting for an hour on the chair and you get up, you think, wow, that's not very comfortable. Giving children different ways of engaging in their learning. Children know themselves best, even
Yeah.
subconsciously, they know what they need. So that classroom, I think if that became every classroom, how amazing would that be?
Incredible. Absolutely wonderful. Yeah. And so yourself and your wonderful colleagues at your MAT, so we had Louise Lawrence and Sarah Camacho, worked with Twinkl recently with yourself to create this incredible resource. And I'm going to put the resource in the notes below here if you're watching on YouTube, and I'm going to put it on, if you're on your phone listening to you'll be able to scroll down and find this resource on there. And this resource was sort of top tips, wasn't it, for resource provisions and how you can set one up. Could you share with us just briefly then what you've done in your trust and your top tips as a trust for setting up resource provisions?
Definitely. So we've been working with Natalie Packer. I'm so lucky to be able to learn
We love
from
Natalie
her.
Packer.
Yeah, we love you, Natalie.
Shout out to Natalie.
Absolutely. We've been creating a document around underpinning aims and principles of an enhanced provision, whether that's a SEND unit, a resource provision, or an internal provision. So being really clear on what is the purpose,
Yeah.
who are the children that are going to be accessing it, and how are we going to ensure that whilst accessing that different support that they need, they still retain a sense of belonging in their classroom as part of their class families, and actually that their families are still engaged with their learning and understanding that they are part of their class.
Yeah.
From our SEND unit point of view, we are making sure that the children are getting the very best education possible. They're our most vulnerable pupils. Some of them are children that would quite easily sit within a specialist school, but there aren't any spaces, and so we endeavour to provide that very best education for them. And it's around working with professionals. I think we talked about ensuring the staff that are teaching those children are your most skilled staff in the school.
Yeah.
And actually those staff using the skill set of those staff to upskill the rest of your teachers across the school, so that you've got that enhanced understanding of inclusion as an approach for the whole school. Opportunities to go into classes. So we spoke with Sarah, who's got that little explorers unit at Whitchurch.
Yeah.
They've just got the agreement for September to open a Key Stage 2 because of the success for the local authority and for the local children. So children that were, spending an hour and a half each way in a taxi to go to somewhere far away are now in their own community, attending school with children that they live on the same estates as. And it's just been absolutely wonderful. And children that started there in September, their end of Key Stage 1 outcome on their EHCP was to use eye gaze to communicate. So we're talking that level of complexity.
Yeah.
And when I went with Natalie Packer a few weeks ago, the children are speaking, they're talking, you can't shut them up. So they've
Oh,
absolutely smashed the eye gaze and gone straight past that because the environment is so enabling. Those children are succeeding. And for some of those children already, they're spending 5 mornings a week in class accessing maths and English at an age-related expectation with support. And some of them are going in the afternoons and accessing that breadth of foundation subjects, but with their peers. So they're lucky that they've got 2 families. They've got their little explorer family, and that's staff and children, but then they've got their main class families as well, eating lunch in the hall, taking part in PE. And these children, are children that potentially could have been out of education because there's no specialist places for them, or would have been spending up to 3 hours a day traveling, that now can walk to school round the corner from where they live and really get that level of support. Such a success. So part of the documentation that we're creating is around capturing the success, and how we've got there.
Yeah.
And making sure that we can have a strategy to replicate that across our schools so that we can really work together with the local authority to meet the needs of the children together. So not battling, not fighting and falling out because there's no special school places or we're in a crisis. Actually, what can we do? And there's lots that we can do, and everybody's really committed to making that happen.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your time. Really appreciated it. You've been a brilliant guest.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Thanks, Georgina.